with the first of our conversations. So I leave the floor to Mariana Ciancia and her first international guest.
Okay, so good morning, everyone, again, and welcome, Gaston. I'd like just to briefly introduce our first guest, and I'm really glad because Gaston arrived here thanks to a guest of last year edition, Juana Rausi. Just a few words to introduce you. So Gaston Lisak is one of the founders of Random Happiness. Random Happiness, and please feel free to adjust also my description, is a movement that believes in happiness. And I'm really happy to start this marathon with this idea of happiness also in design, in creation. And so Random Happiness believes in happiness as a revolutionary tool. Upon graduation, Gaston was awarded a grant at Fabrica, so the well-renowned research center of Benetton, and he spent there 2 years developing his work on visual storytelling and pop-up exhibition. But also Gaston is a teacher at Elisava. Elisava is the School of Design and Engineering in Barcelona, where he leads workshops in the field of art thinking. Collective creation and co-creation, and currently is also a PhD student at the Faculty of Architecture in Lisbon. So I just want to open this conversation reading what Gaston shared with us in order to have an idea of the topic that we can really tackle and unpack during the conversation. It said, on a daily basis, as human beings, we interact and coexist with objects. We are surrounded by objects, and so he decided to take the cluster Understanding the Design Practice. And then we are going to share and discuss this topic related to the idea of workspaces, but also the beauty and symbolism of the found objects. So just to give you also some background stories, when we start collecting and asking our colleagues all around the world to participate to the conversation, we ask them not just to choose one cluster in order to discuss about their research activity, but also artistic activity and so on. We asked them to identify some hashtags. And the first hashtag that Gaston chose was anachronistic object. So I'd like to ask you, okay, but what an anachronistic object is?
First of all, thank you, Mariana, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Sorry if there is some sounds and noises, because here there is a lot of works in Barcelona, so it's a mess. But going back to the question, anachronistic object, I think it's any object that is a bit out of date, but is living with us in our society today. So I would like to use some words of a Catalan artist called Oriol Vilanova, that thinks about this object as a kind of a zombie that is living here in this society nowadays. This co-living with us.
Okay, so thank you very much. And I'm also really fascinated about this idea of having objects that can really talk to us, objects that are important not just for example, product designer or furniture designer, but also as human beings. As you were saying, because we are surrounded by a lot of different objects. So, and also about this idea that the object can tell us a story. The fact that is it possible to design, to create objects embedded in them some stories, because they can really let us understand something new, but also they can become a kinds of boundary object, let's say, because they can be something that we can share all together in order to also not to be isolated, if we want to stick to this concept of, okay, no designer, not artist is an island. So how do you think we can use this object?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, the object itself is really interesting because has a lot of layers of information. From the smell, the sound, you know, like an object has kind of a scars that will tell a story. And I think today, for example, we have a detachment of the objects, you know, in a moment that we are working a lot with screens, this hyper digitalization, and we really are losing this idea of touch and the objects itself. And I'm a person that I really use, for example, second-hand markets to observe. I think the object itself can help us as an instrument to learn from the past, to learn also the present, how we are living, what's the difference, and then to predict or produce or project better futures. So you were, yeah.
Sorry, no, please go on, sorry.
I know, so you were saying like, what do we do or how can we use it? I think like one of the keywords here is empathy. And this idea of, okay, what happened with this object? What happened in a moment that you become this object, that you know, that you put yourself inside this object? And the other day I was talking, was interesting because you have another speaker called Simone Rebaudengo that is also invited. And he also have a work, he published a book called Everyone is Someone. And he was doing this kind of exercise of, what if you become a Roomba and you go, you know, at home? Or, you know, having this twist of mind, of this change of perspective, I think in design is super important. So not just thinking about empathy as humans, but empathy as things, objects, other beings, you know?
And so you talk a lot about this idea of, okay, we really need to come back to have a physical relation with object, because the risk of this strong and tough, let's say, digital transformation can let people be mismatched regarding some physical object. But for example, there are also some objects that are defined phygital object. So how do you think that, or do you think is it possible, for example, to embed, since you are saying, okay, we need to start an empathic relationship with object, but do you think it's possible to try to do that also with phygital objects? So in order to not just lost the physical relation with something, but also maintain this evolution in terms of digitalization, because it's something that is really improving our life, I think.
Totally agree. I'm super proactive in technology, and I think it's super important. And all the like the pedagogical act or the idea of learning have been changing through these 2-3 years. No, I mean, we really changed drastically, and we have room for more collaborative spaces, hybrid spaces, as you were talking before. So I'm super up for it, and I think it's for sure like one way to go. But I think it's to find the right balance between both. You know, in the PhD I'm doing now, the main goal is to use these objects almost as a trigger to really create knowledge. So you can use them as a way of learning. But of course, you can have different layers. Can be physical, can be digital, can be phygital. So the room is super big, and we can really experiment and play with that.
Okay, before leaving this first hashtag, I'd like to ask you one last question, because what I'm really fascinated about this idea of phygital object, because I'm a communication designer, so I'm not a product designer, but what I really love nowadays is the fact that it's possible to, thanks to technology, but also to materiality and let's say brand identity, construction the identity, the idea of using narratives and storytelling, embedded them within the object. So do you think it's possible to generate new stories new narrative path, recontextualizing, let's say, or transforming the object. So what do you think?
I think yes, definitely. I mean, I think that's the beginning of my research, but I think there is a big space to experiment that, and there is a long path. As humans, we always love to hear stories. You know, like we really like to hear stories, and we connect and we empathize, and there is this special connections. And I think the idea of recontextualize is something we've been seeing during the past decades. Even like, with Duchamp, for example, one of the first fathers of contemporary art, when he did, this translation or this move of concepts with the urinal in this case. So I think there is a big room for that. And I think for sure, I hope we will demonstrate that, and we can bring some knowledge also to the community, to the scientific community.
No, and another thing that fascinated me about your story. Sorry, this is a kind of warning for the audience, because I will have the opportunity to talk also throughout the date, and I really like to talk about stories. And what is fascinating to me is the idea of artivist. So the idea that we can use art to make changes. And that's leading me to the second hashtag that you propose, that is art thinking. And it was really fascinating to me, because coming from the design field, we are used to the design thinking approach. That's why my question is, can you describe this art thinking approach, and how is different, for example, from the design thinking approach?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And it's a question that's evolving every day a bit more. But I think also I have a design background, so design thinking has been super important. But in higher education in design, it's true that it has been more focused in humans and in human behavior and in people, right? So more and more we are seeing that it's needed in higher education more space of experimentation, more space, maybe briefings that are less close, that are not meant to have a new product or not meant to have a new service, but more to have a critical approach, more to have questions. So using design in this way. So I believe we need to have this kind of experiences from art and bring these elements that are interesting from art to the design higher education.
Okay, sorry, because in the meanwhile, I'm checking my notes, because what you just said was really connected to what Professor Matteo Ingaramo was saying. So the fact of projecting, so throw something in the future, so not just messages in this case object, but also an approach, because this idea of experimenting, it's really important, and it's leading to me to another quotes coming from the Random Happiness website that was really interesting, that said, consider everything an experiment. And this idea also that every mistake is a way to level up. And it's something that can be also applied, for example, to what we faced in this year of lockdown and the pandemic situation, because our work, our life, everything was really challenged, and we are still trying to learn how to take what we learned from this year in order to project something new in the future. But going back to this idea of art thinking approach, can you, for example, can you give us some examples of the art thinking approaches? Or because I know that, for example, you led art thinking workshop, and what is interesting to me is, for example, how the students react to this idea of using art.
Cool. So let's try to, because you say a lot of questions at the
I'm
same
sorry.
time. No, it's fine. So I think regarding to the quote that you also say, in the art thinking approach, is really important the materials itself and what the material means to use, one or the other. And this idea of test, try, working with the hand is also really important. And that's why also we have it as part of the manifesto of random happiness. So during this kind of digitalization, when we try, okay, we are all in Zoom, what do we do? And we've been that there was a lot of problems trying to replicate and to copy experiences that we have in real, like in physical life, and didn't work. But it's fine. During this test, like trying things, I think you could learn and you could see what can be possible or not. But if you really need to be open and you really need to be in the mood of testing in order to improve and to go, as you were saying, to level up your work. Because if not, it's impossible. If you stay in the constraints, it's really difficult to move forward. Go.
No, I was just going back to it's not a question, but can you describe, for example, the process that you use during the art thinking workshops?
That's a good question. I cannot describe you exactly because each time or each action might be different. I can explain you one of the latest things we've done with Elisaba that was really interesting. It was a 5 weeks program where we were working with different backgrounds from graphic, product, interior design. And the main goal was rethinking curiosity. And we took this idea of the cabinets. Do you know the cabinets of curiosity?
Yes.
From the 18th century, when you will find people just saving weird things in little boxes. So we asked students what will be the cabinet of curiosities of today. And with this big question, students had to really manage to try to do, like this image of the present that we are living and what is interesting to highlight. So there was a lot of different projects. One of them that I found also interesting and relevant was that one of the groups of the students, they managed to take off 1,963 chewing gums that were found on the bottom of the tables of Elisaba. And then what they did, they were working with that and they scaled that, they scanned them and they show it. And it was super interesting how these little chewing gums become massive and they also become almost like these precious stones. And this idea of seeing the world differently or highlighting or embracing this randomness, I think that's super important in these kind of processes.
Thank you. Talking about, because it's really clear to me now how the students can reach and what they can learn from this kind of approach. But then when you were describing the experience, the result, the output of one of the group, I was thinking, okay, wow. So you had the opportunity to exhibit also the works of the students. And if you did that, where and how the other people react?
Yeah, so we had the really nice opportunity to exhibit that in Ideal, that is a big space in Barcelona, where they have also screens and it's really, really a big space. So we had several groups, I think like between seven different challenges. In our case, we're doing the cabinets. And it was really interesting because they were building the actual thing. So they really had to think about not just the content, not just the collection, the creation of the collection, but also how they will share it with the people that will come. So that was super, super challenging for them. So there was a lot of moments where they were a bit lost, but it was really important for them. Also, something to highlight is that the teachers that were working with that, we were three. The three of us were connected with the object. We were doing research related to that. So I think for the students, the fact that we were coming from there was really important because we were part of the whole thing, right? So as a student, also they were super engaged and they saw that they could do anything.
Okay, so in what it's also what I was saying is the fact that usually, at least what I'm teaching to my students is that creativity is staying within the constraints. Because in my opinion, if you have some constraints, you really need to fight in order to find a way to communicate, to construct, to create a new element. But at the same time, you're right, because it's not so, if you're not a creative person, probably this situation can really scare you. So probably having the possibility to be free, it's something that can really let students enjoy also the creative process. And the last question regarding this art thinking approach is, so what do you think your students learned from this workshop?
That's a good question. I think regarding to the last thing you were saying, Mariana, I think constraints are important. And I mean, when we were doing this project, the constraint was to build a collection. And then also to exhibit it physically, they need to build this structure. So there is some constraints in the process. But what they learn is that they can really do whatever they want in terms of content, and that any little thing can be really a starting point of something bigger. I think that's super important. They also learn about the importance of proposing ideas, because also in the market or outside, when they finish the degree, they need to propose and they need to have like self-initiated projects. And this kind of critical thinking as a designer, as an artist, as an educator is super important. So they take that with them. And yeah, at the end, they are happy. I mean, they are super lost in some of the stages, but they really see that at the end that it's important for them, and they take some really interesting inputs.
And yeah, and then moving to the last hashtag, that is designing higher education. You said that the workshop lasted 5 weeks. That's correct. So can you just describe the timing? Because I'm really curious about the process. Because, for example, we are used to use the double diamond process, in order to design. So a moment in which we open up the conversation in order to be inspired by the existing, let's say, and then asking question, having surveys, questionnaire in order to collect the needs from using a user-centered approach, and then closing in order to find the concept and so on. So I was really curious about the timing and the process.
Yeah. So in this case, think about 5 weeks, but think as the intervention and the work was less, because we have less sessions. So it's not the full 5 weeks. But as far as we were different teachers, it's true that it was a similar approach in terms of research, references, try to understand what is the situation, what is the topics that they would like to talk about. So there was some similarities in this double diamond that you were talking, so more open and then closing moments. But yeah, basically we were in the timing like super tight on, okay, we have a date, we have an exhibition date, and then we need to deal with it. So there is this ideation stage, there is this part where people get like super inspired, and then there was a lot, the collection, the creation of the collection, that was also really important, because it takes time to create a collection, and then the documentation and communication of it.
Okay. And so my last topic of this conversation is how do you think is it possible to embed and to put this art thinking approach within a design course? Because sometimes people in the design field, they don't want to be understood but like artists. So what do you think?
I mean, I think there is always this fight of, no, you are a designer, no, you are an artist, no. And I think maybe we go too far to that, you know. Maybe we need to really blend much more, as we are blending education and talking about hybrid spaces and collective. So we need to really break this line and really take the best of each one and try to combine them. So I think we really need these kind of approaches where, again, we don't need to really produce more products if we don't need. We don't need to produce more services if we don't need, but really have this critical thinking approach and have more questions in terms of design. So in order to make that, using these art techniques, or using these art capsules in some of the moments that you have in the whole degree, because it's big, is super. I think it's super useful. In my case, in the research that I'm doing, the PhD, I'm also working with formal and non-formal education. So one important part in here is to mix students with other professions, with people that maybe they are older or younger of them. You know, I think this idea of transdisciplinary and this idea of different aging is super important in the learning process. So not just understanding the classroom as a box, if not classroom as a way to really experiment and to learn. And this can be outside the uni, this can be somewhere else, this can be in a workshop. So we are trying here in Elisava really to push that, to learn in different contexts, because it makes the student much more powerful once they finish.
And at Elisava, are the students free, for example, to choose some courses according, for example, to their not capabilities, but what they like more, or the path it's more fixed?
No. At the end, they build their own, you know, curriculum. So I think that's super important. Also, it makes it's honest with the moment we are living, right? Like you are able to choose whatever you like, wherever you would like to learn. And at the end, you become special because you have different learnings. Even can be learnings from, you know, things that are totally different. You can be maybe an expert of how to collect wasabi, you know. And this can influence in your work, and this can affect in your work in the future. So I really encourage also in Elisava and in Random Happiness to learn from anything you can, because this will have an impact in the future for you.
So since we have just 3 minutes left, just to wrap up, because we discussed about a lot of different things, and I'm really glad to have the opportunity to talk with you and to know you. So we can say that we need to learn that object can have, let's say, a soul or an history, stories that can be learned. And also object can be used as a trigger to create new knowledge. Doing what? Using an art thinking approach that you are testing this art thinking approach and this idea of inserting, let's say, art within the design education. And so I don't know, I just want to ask you if you have a message to deliver to the future students, to the future designers, something that we can take with us in our everyday practice.
Wow.
Go.
No, I think that was really interesting wrap up. And what I will say to the students is use your curiosity. Be curious, really, because the curious will lead to pleasure, and then this pleasure will lead to really learning. And I think that's super important, because the path is really long, and you really need to enjoy each part of it.
Okay, so thank you very much. This idea of moving from curiosity, so being curious, to having pleasure in working, designing, creating arts, doing, let's say, whatever you want, can really move you to learn something new. So I really thank you, Gaston. I hope that we will have the opportunity to stay in touch also in the future, and also give you big luck for your PhD and your research. And so thank you very much.